In the Madeleine McCann case, the piece of evidence that could have solved the mystery wasn't a strand of hair or a fingerprint. It was a piece of paper, a witness statement. And the story of how the police received this evidence and chose to shelve it is more shocking than any conspiracy theory. The narrative the world knows begins like a nightmare under the Portuguese sun. Praia da Luz, 2007, a holiday resort, a group of doctor friends enjoying dinner, among them Kate and Gerry McCann. Their 3-year-old daughter, Madeleine, is sleeping in a hotel room just a few meters away. Around 10 at night, the mother goes to check on the child and finds the bed empty, the window open. Panic sets in. The police are called. The search begins. The world stops and watches. The official story is that of a daring and terrible abduction, a tragedy that turns the parents into victims and the little girl into a global icon of lost innocence. The family, united and unwavering, leads a worldwide campaign for the truth, supported by millions. This is the version of events that was carefully constructed and sold for mass consumption. This story traveled the entire world. And speaking of which, I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching me from right now? Leave a comment below. It's amazing to see how our community of investigators connects from every time zone, all united by one thing: the search for truth. Now let's get back to apartment 5A. But what if the truth wasn't lost but deliberately ignored? What if the most important piece of the puzzle was handed to the police and they chose not to fit it in? The hidden truth of this case isn't about what happened in room 5A. It's about what happened inside the investigation room. The thesis of this video is that the Portuguese police had in their hands a statement. The statement of David Payne, one of the friends dining with the McCanns, which contained inconsistencies so severe and red flags so clear that it should have changed the entire course of the investigation. But, through a combination of bias, pressure, and a shocking strategic decision, they actively chose not to dig deeper. This video isn't about proving whether David Payne is guilty or innocent. It's about proving that the police failed in their most basic duty, to follow the evidence. We will expose the procedural failures and the inexplicable decisions that turned a crucial piece of evidence into a forgotten footnote. We will reveal how bureaucracy and an excessive focus on a single theory may have been the true accomplices in the mystery of Madeleine McCann. To understand how they ignored the evidence, we first need to analyze what exactly was so explosive in that statement. To understand why David Payne's statement was a ticking time bomb that the police decided not to defuse, we first need to dismantle the official story everyone was protecting. A story that, under the light of forensic analysis and logic, simply doesn't hold up. The investigation begins at the crime scene, apartment 5A. The official narrative says an abductor entered through the bedroom window, but the physical evidence shows this is practically impossible. The Portuguese police conducted tests and found that the external shutter was extremely difficult and noisy to open from the outside. To do so without waking 3 small children just a few feet away would require supernatural skill. More importantly, there wasn't a single sign of forced entry. Not on the shutter, not on the window latch. The dust on the windowsill was undisturbed. No clothing fibers, no tool marks. The forensic logic is clear. The window could only have been opened from the inside. They said it was an escape route. The evidence shows it was a piece of theater. They said the front door of the apartment was left unlocked to make the checks easier. But the evidence of logic destroys this claim. If a professional and silent abductor enters through the unlocked door, the easiest route, why would he risk everything to exit through the window, a complex and noisy route? And if he entered through the window, why would he care about the door? The crime scene doesn't have the signature of a professional. It has the signature of confusion, of a story hastily assembled with pieces that don't fit. The final proof is the absence of an intruder's DNA. In a small room, a grown man, carrying a child who might be struggling, would inevitably leave a trace, a strand of hair, a skin cell. But there was nothing. The room was forensically clean of any stranger. The crime scene doesn't point to an abduction. It points to a staging. With the crime scene crumbling, the focus shifts to the actors, the Tapas 7, the group of friends dining with the McCanns. Their statements should have been the bedrock of the investigation, but they became a swamp of contradictions and convenient memories. Each statement seemed less like a recollection and more like a performance. Let's start with what we can call the dinner contradiction. The group claims they took turns checking on the children, but when the police asked for details, the story fell apart. No one could agree on the times. Who went at what time? The answers varied from statement to statement, creating a timeline that was hazy and impossible to verify. The group's collective memory seemed to have selective amnesia for the details that mattered most. Then we have the phantom sighting. One of the friends, Jane Tanner, gave the police what seemed to be the definitive proof of the abduction. She said she saw a man carrying a child in pajamas around 9:15 p.m., walking away from the apartment. The image was powerful and fueled the abduction theory for months. The problem, the story didn't hold up. Jane's description changed several times, and later, the investigation concluded that the man she saw was just another tourist, an innocent British father carrying his own sleeping daughter. The main eyewitness to the abduction, in fact, saw nothing related to the crime. The cornerstone of the official narrative was an illusion. And then we come to the statement of David Payne, the man at the center of our video. His testimony should have been the strongest alibi for Gerry McCann, but it became the deepest crack in the story. Payne claimed he saw Gerry around 9:30 p.m., talking to another tourist. This would create an alibi for Gerry, showing he was outside the apartment acting normally. But Payne's memory was strangely selective. He vividly remembered this encounter, but was vague about almost every other detail of the night. Even more disturbing was what he said about the afternoon of the disappearance. Payne was one of the last people to see Madeleine alive. He described the visit casually, saying the children were happy. However, in later interrogations, reports emerged that he had admitted Madeleine seemed sleepy and lethargic, and that he even questioned Gerry about it. If this is true, it means Payne lied in his initial statement. He hid a crucial fact, that something was wrong with Madeleine hours before she disappeared. He wasn't just reporting facts. He was building a narrative of normality. Their story is a puzzle with missing pieces and others that simply don't fit. What to you is the most glaring inconsistency so far? The crime scene that makes no sense, or the contradictory statements from the friends? Leave your investigator's opinion in the comments below. The insights from this community often illuminate the dark corners the official investigation ignored. When the words of witnesses become useless, an investigation needs a silent hero. A witness that cannot be intimidated, that has no loyalty to anyone, and that does not lie, science. And science arrived in Praia da Luz in the form of two British sniffer dogs, Eddie and Keela. And what they found not only contradicted the official narrative, it blew it up. Eddie was a cadaver dog, trained to detect the specific subtle odor that a decomposing human body leaves behind, even in microscopic amounts. Keela was a blood dog, an expert in finding traces of blood, even if they have been cleaned up. Weeks after the disappearance, they were brought to apartment 5A. The result was chilling. Inside the apartment, Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave a strong and clear alert behind the living room sofa and inside a wardrobe in the parents' bedroom. This doesn't mean there was a body there at that moment. It means the scent of death had been embedded in those locations. Keela, the blood dog, also alerted behind the sofa. Science was saying that death and blood had been present in that apartment. But the most damning discovery came later. The dogs were taken to inspect the car the McCanns rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. In the trunk of that car, a Renault Scenic, both dogs had the strongest reactions of the entire investigation. Eddie alerted to the scent of a cadaver. Keela alerted to blood. The logic is relentless. An abductor would not return weeks later to place his victim's body in the family's rental car. The only explanation that connects these dots is that Madeleine's body had been in that apartment and was later transported in that car. The samples collected from the spots where the dogs alerted were sent to one of the most advanced forensic labs in the world, in the UK. The McCanns' defense would later try to discredit the results, but the initial facts are clear. A sample taken from the car's trunk, the same spot as the dog's frantic alert, produced a partial DNA result. In an initial communication, the lab stated that the sample contained 15 of Madeleine's 19 DNA markers. Although the complexity of the sample made it legally inconclusive for a court of law, the message to investigators was a thunderclap. The probability of it being someone else's DNA was astronomical. A crime scene that makes no sense, statements that contradict each other, and now science. Dogs that find the scent of death in the apartment. The same dogs that find the scent of death and blood in the trunk of a car rented weeks later. And in that same trunk, a significant match to the missing child's DNA. The abduction story cannot explain any of this. It becomes a fantasy. Science was screaming that a tragedy happened within those four walls, a truth that cannot be denied by press officers or lawyers. So if the abduction story is a sham, what really happened that night? To answer that, we need to stop looking for a monster out there and start looking at the pact of silence that was sealed in here. Forget the story of the abductor. Science and logic point in a much more tragic and human direction. The night of May 3rd likely happened in a very different way. Let's reconstruct the events not based on what they said, but on what the evidence suggests. The night begins with a miscalculation. The McCanns and their friends, all doctors, successful professionals, are on vacation. They want to relax, enjoy their dinner, but they are also parents. The solution they find is a dangerous compromise. Leave the children alone, but with periodic checks. They believe they are in control of the situation. The children, including Madeleine and her younger twin siblings, are given a dose of a children's sedative like Calpol to ensure they sleep through the night. This isn't an accusation. It was a relatively common practice, but it is a crucial factor. Around 9 o'clock, Gerry McCann does his check. He enters the apartment. But this time, something is wrong. Maybe Madeleine didn't react well to the sedative. Maybe she woke up disoriented. Maybe she fell out of bed and hit her head. Or the darkest theory, maybe there was an accidental overdose of the medication. Not a malicious act, but a mistake. A fatal mistake. Gerry finds his daughter Madeleine lifeless. The panic that sets in at this moment is not the panic of a father who has lost his daughter to a stranger. It is the ice-cold panic of a doctor who has made a mistake that cost his own daughter's life. His career, his reputation, the image of a perfect family, it's all about to crumble. The first reaction is not to call the police. The first reaction is damage control. He returns to the dinner table, but he doesn't tell the truth. He can't. He needs time. He needs help. He confides the terrible secret to Kate. Their pain is real, but it's now mixed with a paralyzing fear. The plan is formed in desperation. They cannot admit to negligence. An accidental death would be a scandal that would destroy them. The only way out is to create an alternative scenario, a break-in, an abduction. It's the only narrative that transforms them from negligent parents into victims. They need time to hide Madeleine's body. The alarm is only raised by Kate at 10 o'clock, giving them a window of almost an hour to begin the cover-up. Madeleine's body is wrapped in a sheet or blanket and hidden, perhaps in the parents' bedroom wardrobe, the same place where the cadaver dog, Eddie, would give a frantic alert weeks later. The window is opened from the inside. The shutter is raised. The crime scene is staged. When Kate screams, "They've taken her," she isn't lying about Madeleine's absence. She's lying about the cause. The panic the friends see is genuine, but the source of that panic is the secret they now carry. The frantic search that follows is part of the theater. They need to look like desperate parents. And in the following days, as the world shows its solidarity, Madeleine's body is moved, probably during the night, to a more secure location, before being finally transported in the trunk of the rented Renault Scenic, the same car where the dogs and the DNA analysis would find the traces of death. To understand why intelligent, successful people would make such a catastrophic decision, we need to understand the psychology of narcissism and self-preservation. Gerry and Kate McCann weren't just parents. They were successful doctors. They lived in a world where image is everything. Admitting that their negligence, even if accidental, led to their daughter's death would be the end of everything they had built. Their medical careers would be over. The stigma of the parents who killed their daughter would follow them forever. The human brain, when faced with an existential threat, does not operate logically. It operates in survival mode. The primary instinct is to eliminate the threat. In that moment, the threat wasn't an abductor. It was the truth. The cover-up is not born from malice, but from a terrified selfishness. It's what psychologists call confirmation bias in action. They cling to the only narrative that saves them, that of the abduction, and they begin to believe it, or at least to perform it with desperate conviction. They are not thinking like grieving parents. They are thinking like crisis managers. Every interview, every appeal, every tear becomes part of a public relations campaign to sell the abduction story to the world. The problem is, for the lie to work, it needs support. Alone they would crumble under the weight of interrogation. They need their friends. And this is where the tragedy turns into a conspiracy. The pact of silence is formed, not with a blood oath, but with knowing glances, with the unsaid, with loyalty to a friend overcoming loyalty to the truth and to a dead child. The group closes ranks. They understand, even if they never admit it aloud, that the group's survival depends on the survival of the lie. So far, does this reconstruction of events seem more plausible than the story of a phantom abductor? Does the psychology of fear and self-preservation better explain their actions than the pain of pure grief? Tell me in the comments if the pieces are starting to fit together for you, because the evidence I'm about to show you now is not a theory. It is the proof that seals this case. The definitive proof, the piece that transforms the cover-up theory into a virtual certainty, didn't come from a dog or a test tube. It came from the statement of the man who was the pillar of the McCanns' alibi, David Payne. Payne was a close friend, especially of Gerry. His testimony was crucial to establishing the normality of that night. But when the Portuguese police pressed him, his statement became the biggest piece of evidence against his friends. Let's focus on a specific detail: David Payne's visit to the McCanns' apartment on the afternoon of the day of the disappearance. Payne was the last friend to see Madeleine alive, besides her parents. He described the visit casually. He said he went to the apartment to see how the children were. He described Madeleine as happy and healthy, a scene of idyllic normality. But the Portuguese police noticed something strange in his behavior as he described the scene. He was nervous, hesitant. The real bombshell came months later, through a source in the British police who leaked details of the interrogations. During a more intense interrogation, David Payne allegedly admitted something shocking about that visit. He reportedly said that upon entering the apartment, he smelled a strange odor, and that when he saw Madeleine, she didn't look well. She seemed sleepy, lethargic. He allegedly even asked Gerry if she was okay, and Gerry supposedly gave an evasive answer. Stop and think about the implication of this. If Payne noticed that Madeleine was groggy hours before the disappearance, it corroborates the sedation theory. But the most devastating part is what he did with this information. He lied. In his initial official statement, he painted a picture of perfect normality. He hid his concern. He hid the fact that Madeleine didn't seem well. Why? Because admitting it would be admitting that something was wrong in the McCanns' apartment before any imaginary abductor showed up. It would be giving the police the first thread to pull, the thread that could unravel the entire web of lies. David Payne's lie about the afternoon visit is not just any inconsistency. It's what investigators call a protective lie. He wasn't lying to save himself. He was lying to save Gerry McCann. He was actively constructing a false alibi of normality. His statement was a conscious choice to obstruct justice in the name of loyalty. He knew something was wrong, but he chose silence. He chose to protect his friend over the truth about what happened to a 3-year-old child. This lie is the emotional smoking gun. It is the proof of the cover-up. We don't need to find a confession from Gerry or Kate. David Payne's statement is the indirect confession. It shows there was a secret to be kept from the very beginning. It shows that the abduction narrative was a construction, and that he, David Payne, was one of its architects. Science pointed to death in the apartment, and Payne's statement shows us the beginning of the cover-up. With this evidence on the table, the question changes. It's no longer what happened to Madeleine, but rather who helped bury the truth. The answer leads us to a conspiracy of silence much larger than just a panicked couple. It takes us to the heart of power, influence, and how justice can be manipulated. David Payne's protective lie, the indirect confession that there was a secret to be kept, should have been the end of the story. With the forensic evidence, the group's contradictions, and now a statement pointing to a cover-up, the Portuguese police had a solid case to charge the parents with negligent homicide, and the group even declared with obstruction of justice, or formal suspects. But it was at that exact moment that the investigation stopped being about finding the truth and started being about politics, power, and influence. The truth wasn't just buried by a group of friends. It was cemented in place by powerful institutions. As soon as the McCanns were named suspects, a public relations and diplomatic pressure machine, funded by millions in donations, kicked into gear. Because of the formal suspicion placed on a couple of British doctors, the consequence was overwhelming diplomatic pressure from the UK government on Portugal. The British Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, and his ambassador in Lisbon got personally involved. The narrative in the media, especially the British media, changed overnight. The Portuguese police, once seen as partners, were now systematically demonized, portrayed as incompetent, lazy, and even cruel for daring to investigate an upper-middle-class British couple. Because of the sniffer dog's findings, the consequence was a campaign of scientific discredit. Experts hired by the McCanns' defense appeared on every TV channel, ridiculing the evidence, calling the dogs unreliable and the samples contaminated. Because of the DNA result that pointed to Madeleine in the car's trunk, the consequence was the British forensic lab backtracking on its own findings, issuing a final report that classified the sample as inconclusive, a legal technicality that ignored the overwhelming probability. The system was turning against itself. The tools of justice were being used to manufacture doubt. The final consequence was inevitable. In 2008, less than a year after naming the McCanns as suspects, the Portuguese Attorney General's office, crushed by political pressure and the media smear campaign, archived the case. Kate and Gerry McCann were cleared. The message was crystal clear. The truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann was too inconvenient. It was easier, safer, and politically more advantageous for everyone involved to maintain the fiction of the phantom abductor than to confront the reality that the responsibility might lie within that family. Justice wasn't blind. It was deliberately gagged. The price of a cover-up of this magnitude is never paid by those who commit it. It's paid by those who dare to challenge it. And the biggest collateral victim of this conspiracy of silence has a name: Gonçalo Amaral. He was the chief detective of the Portuguese Judiciary Police, the man in charge of the initial investigation. He was the first to suspect the McCanns' story, the first to see the cracks in the narrative. It was he who followed the trail of evidence, who requested the sniffer dogs, who built the case against the parents. He was doing his job, but for daring to do his job, he was crushed. Amaral was abruptly and controversially removed from the case, accused of criticizing the British police. He retired from the force and wrote a book, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, where he detailed his theory and the evidence that supported it. The reaction was immediate. The McCanns sued him for libel, starting a legal battle that would last for over a decade. They didn't just want to silence him, they wanted to destroy him financially and professionally. Amaral's book was banned in Portugal for years. He was ordered to pay €1 million compensation to the McCanns, a decision that nearly bankrupted him. Although higher courts later overturned that ruling, the message was sent to any other police officer, journalist, or witness who dared to question the official version: speak the truth and you will pay the price. The story of Gonçalo Amaral is the story of how the system protects its own, even if it means devouring its own servants. He became the scapegoat, the man punished for being right. His career was destroyed not by incompetence, but by his refusal to participate in the charade. He is the human face of injustice in this case. It's infuriating. It's frustrating. And that's exactly why this channel exists. If you believe that these stories of power and cover-ups need to be exposed, that the truth cannot be bought or silenced, then join this mission. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every new subscription is a vote of confidence and a clear sign that we are not alone in this search for answers. In the end, the official verdict is an insult to intelligence and to justice. The Madeleine McCann case remains officially open, but unsolved. Over the years, the British police have spent more than £12 million on their own investigation, Operation Grange. They pursued hundreds of leads, investigated dozens of suspects, but never got close to an answer. Why? Because from the beginning, Operation Grange operated under a flawed premise that there was an abduction. They refused to seriously re-examine the possibility of an accidental death and cover-up. They built a multi-million-pound investigation on a foundation of sand. Meanwhile, the McCanns and the Tapas 7 have moved on with their lives. They were never forced to answer for the contradictions in their statements. David Payne, the man whose protective lie was the key to the cover-up, was never charged with perjury or obstruction of justice. They won. They managed to sell their story, supported by a system that preferred a comfortable lie to a devastating truth. The absence of a body allowed for legal, reasonable doubt, but there is no moral doubt. The evidence, when viewed together, tells a clear, consistent, and terrifying story. Justice didn't fail for a lack of clues. It failed for a lack of courage. The system won. The truth was sacrificed on the altar of political convenience and public image. But in the midst of all this darkness, one final question echoes, the most personal of all. What does this terrible story teach us about the nature of truth and lies? And what do we as a society do with a truth so inconvenient? The inconvenient truth this story teaches us is that justice is not blind. It is selective. My final conviction, after analyzing every failure and every decision, is that the mystery of Madeleine McCann persists not for lack of clues, but by a deliberate choice. The police had David Payne's statement. They had the red flags. They had a path, and they chose not to follow it. What haunts me is not the complexity of the crime, but the simplicity of the institutional negligence. The truth wasn't lost in a complex conspiracy. It was filed away in a folder, a victim of bureaucracy, bias, and convenience. And that is the most infuriating truth of all. And now, after we've gone through all of this together, I need to know what this story has awakened in you. Use the comment section below, not just to debate, but to leave a testimony. Testify to your frustration, your outrage. Leave a word, a sentence, that shows we have not forgotten and we do not accept the silence the system has imposed. I will read every single comment, because in a world that wants us to be quiet, our collective voice is the only weapon we have. And this fight against silence and injustice doesn't stop here. The same dynamics of power, of a flawed investigation, and of a family at the center of a hurricane are repeated in an even darker way in one of the most infamous cases in American history. In our next documentary, we will investigate how the wealth and influence of the Ramsey family may have buried the truth about what happened to their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. To continue on this mission with me, subscribe and turn on notifications. The search for truth cannot stop. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you not to forget it.